The morning sun scorched Elizabeth Dempsey's tear-stained face as the stagecoach lurched forward, leaving behind the dreams she'd carefully nurtured over countless lonely nights. She was 30 miles outside of Promise Creek, Wyoming territory, her hope abandoned like yesterday's newspaper, when the driver called out that they needed to stop for a broken wheel. Danielle Parker clutched her meager belongings, a single trunk containing everything she owned in this world, and stared out the dusty window of the stagecoach. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life that had carried her across an ocean and half a continent was evaporating like morning dew under the harsh western sun. She had traveled all the way from Boston with a marriage arrangement that had just crumbled before her eyes. "Miss, you'll have to wait here while we fix this wheel," the driver called back to her. "Might be an hour or more." Danielle nodded numbly, still processing the humiliation she'd suffered just hours before. Mr. Jameson, her intended husband, had taken one look at her, asked about her dowry, and upon learning she had none, had promptly informed her that their arrangement was void. His exact words, "I need a wife who brings something to the marriage besides another mouth to feed," still rang in her ears. She stepped out of the coach, grateful for the chance to stretch her legs. The Wyoming landscape stretched out before her, wild and untamed, so different from the crowded streets of Boston, where she'd grown up in her aunt's modest home after her parents died of influenza. Her aunt had recently passed as well, leaving Danielle with nothing but debts and a desperate need to find a new path forward. The stagecoach had stopped near a small creek, and Danielle wandered toward it, seeking solace in the gentle sound of water flowing over rocks. She removed her bonnet, letting the light breeze cool her face as she considered her options. She had enough money for perhaps 2 nights at a hotel, and then what? Return to Boston with her tail between her legs. There was nothing waiting for her there except creditors and pity. "Whoa there, thunder!" A deep voice called out, startling Danielle from her thoughts. A tall man on horseback emerged from a copse of trees, leading a second horse loaded with supplies. His broad shoulders and strong jawline were partially obscured by a well-worn cowboy hat, but there was no hiding the striking blue of his eyes when he spotted her standing by the creek. "Pardon me, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Didn't expect to find a lady out here." Danielle quickly replaced her bonnet. "The stagecoach broke down," she explained, gesturing toward the road where the driver and his assistant were working on the wheel. "We're delayed." The stranger dismounted with easy grace, revealing his considerable height. "Owen Blackwood," he introduced himself. "My ranch is about 3 miles from here." "Danielle Parker," she replied with a small curtsy. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mr. Blackwood. Where you headed, Miss Parker?" Not many folks passing through these parts unless they're going to Promise Creek. Danielle felt her face flush with embarrassment. I was meant to be meeting someone in Promise Creek, but the arrangement has fallen through." Owen's expression grew concerned. A mail-order bride situation. Her surprise must have shown on her face because he quickly added, "It's not uncommon out here, more men than women by a fair margin." "Yes," she admitted, seeing no point in hiding the truth, "but my intended found me unsuitable." Owen's brow furrowed. "Unsuitable? How could that be?" Danielle looked away, focusing on the rushing water of the creek. "I have no dowry. My aunt raised me after my parents died, and when she passed recently, there were more debts than assets. Mr. Jameson decided he needed a wife who could contribute financially to the marriage." Owen removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Sounds to me like this Mr. Jameson is a fool, if you don't mind my saying so." The unexpected support brought a small smile to Danielle's lips. "Thank you for the kind words, Mr. Blackwood, but it doesn't change my predicament. I'm now headed to. Well, I'm not entirely sure where I'm headed. Owen replaced his hat and scratched at his stubbled jaw thoughtfully. Promise Creek has a decent hotel, not fancy but clean. The owner, Mrs. Sullivan, is always looking for help. Perhaps you could find work there while you decide your next move. Danielle nodded, grateful for the suggestion. That seems sensible. I have some experience with household management from helping my aunt. Driver says it'll be another hour, called the stagecoach assistant from the road. Owen glanced at the sky. Sun's getting mighty hot. Would you care to sit in the shade while you wait? I've got water and some jerky if you're hungry. Danielle hesitated only briefly before accepting. There was something trustworthy about Owen Blackwood's open face and direct manner. They walked to a large oak tree, and Owen spread a small blanket on the ground. So what brought you to answer a mail-order bride advertisement, Miss Parker? If you don't mind my asking, Owen said as he handed her a canteen. Danielle took a sip of the cool water before answering. My options in Boston were limited. I could become a governess or companion, but those positions are difficult to secure without connections. I could work in a factory, but the conditions are deplorable, or I could marry. When I saw Mr. Jameson's advertisement, it seemed promising. What did he write that caught your attention? Owen asked, genuinely curious. He described himself as a successful businessman in need of a wife to help manage his household. He wanted someone educated, well-mannered, and fond of children. Danielle sighed. What he failed to mention was his requirement for financial contribution. Owen shook his head. That wasn't right of him. A man should be clear about his expectations. And what about you, Mr. Blackwood? What brings you to Wyoming Territory? Danielle asked, eager to shift the conversation away from her embarrassing situation. I came out here with my pa after the war. He fought for the Union, came back different, said he couldn't stand the crowds back east anymore. We homesteaded together until he passed 5 years ago. Been running the place on my own since then. I'm sorry about your father, Danielle said softly. Thank you. He lived a good life, taught me everything I know about ranching. Owen gazed out at the rolling landscape. It's a good piece of land. Started with cattle, but I've been breeding horses too. That's Thunder there, and the mare is Willow. Best horse I ever trained. They're beautiful animals, Danielle commented, admiring the strong lines of the horses grazing nearby. You ride, Miss Parker. I've had very few opportunities, she admitted. Boston doesn't afford much space for such activities, at least not in my circles. Owen nodded, understanding. Well, out here, riding is as necessary as walking. Life moves at a different pace in the West. The conversation flowed easily between them, and Danielle found herself relaxing in Owen's company. He told stories of ranch life, of cattle drives and wild horses, of winter blizzards and summer droughts. He spoke with such passion about the land and his work that Danielle could almost see herself in that life, a stark contrast to the sterile business arrangement she'd traveled so far to fulfill. All too soon, the stagecoach driver called that they were ready to depart. I should go, Danielle said, rising from the blanket. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Blackwood. Owen stood as well, towering over her petite frame. It was my pleasure, Miss Parker. He hesitated, then added, if you have trouble finding work in Promise Creek, my offer stands. The ranch could use a good hand, and I pay fair wages. Danielle smiled, touched by his generosity. That's very kind of you. I shall keep it in mind. Owen tipped his hat as she walked back to the stagecoach. As she settled into her seat, Danielle found herself watching through the window as Owen Blackwood mounted his horse and rode away, wondering if their paths would cross again. Promise Creek turned out to be a dusty collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with several smaller streets branching off like tributaries from a river. The stagecoach dropped Danielle at the Promise Creek Hotel, a two-story structure that, while not impressive, looked clean and well-maintained. Mrs. Sullivan, the hotel owner, was a plump, gray-haired woman with sharp eyes that seemed to assess Danielle's worth in a single glance. But unlike Mr. Jameson, Mrs. Sullivan seemed to find something of value. "So you're looking for work, are you?" she asked after Danielle explained her situation, carefully omitting the more humiliating details. "Yes, madam. I'm a hard worker and quick to learn." Mrs. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "I could use help with the cleaning and serving meals. Not much pay, but you'd get room and board. We can try it for a week, see how it goes." Danielle accepted gratefully and soon found herself settled into a small room at the back of the hotel, unpacking her few belongings. The work was hard changing linens, scrubbing floors, serving meals to travelers and the occasional local who came in for Mrs. Sullivan's famous apple pie, but Danielle threw herself into it with determination. A week passed, then two. Mrs. Sullivan seemed pleased with her work, and Danielle began to think that perhaps she could make a life here in Promise Creek. It wasn't what she had dreamed of, but it was honest work, and she was beholden to no one. It was early on a Tuesday morning, nearly 3 weeks after her arrival, when Danielle was sweeping the hotel porch and spotted a familiar figure riding down the main street. Owen Blackwood sat tall in his saddle, his broad shoulders squared against the morning sun. He tied Thunder to the hitching post in front of the general store across the street, then paused, his gaze sweeping the surroundings until it landed on her. Recognition lit his face, and he touched the brim of his hat in greeting before disappearing into the store. Danielle found herself smiling as she continued her sweeping, and when Owen emerged from the store some time later with supplies loaded onto a pack horse, she was still on the porch. "Miss Parker," he called, crossing the street. "Good to see you found a place here." "Mr. Blackwood," she replied with a nod. "Yes, Mrs. Sullivan was kind enough to offer me employment." "Hotel work suiting you?" he asked, his blue eyes studying her face. Danielle considered the question. "It's honest work," she said finally, "and Mrs. Sullivan is fair." Owen nodded, understanding what she hadn't said. Sometimes honest work is enough to get by, but not enough to build a life on. One must be grateful for small mercies, Mr. Blackwood. Indeed. He glanced at the hotel behind her, then back to her face. "I meant what I said before, about work at the ranch. Pay would be better than what you're likely getting here." Danielle was surprised by the offer. "What sort of work would it be?" "My housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher, is getting on in years. She's been wanting to move to Denver to live with her daughter. I need someone to cook for the ranch hands and keep the house in order. It's not easy work, but it's steady, and as I said, the pay is good." The prospect was tempting. Danielle had quickly discovered that while Mrs. Sullivan was fair, the pay was indeed meager. At her current rate of saving, it would be years before she had enough to move on or establish herself independently. "I would need to give Mrs. Sullivan proper notice," Danielle said thoughtfully. Owen's face brightened. "So you'll consider it?" "Yes, I believe I will." "Good. I'll be back in town on Friday for the supply wagon. If you've made up your mind by then, I can bring you out to the ranch." Danielle nodded, her mind already racing with the possibilities. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Blackwood." Owen tipped his hat again. "My pleasure, Miss Parker. Until Friday, then." As he rode away, Danielle couldn't help but wonder if this chance meeting was fate's way of offering her a new path. Mrs. Sullivan was surprisingly understanding when Danielle gave her notice that evening. "Can't say I blame you, girl. Ranch work pays better, and Owen Blackwood's a decent sort, not like some of the ranchers around here." "You know him well?" Danielle asked, curious about the man who had offered her this new opportunity. Known him since he came to these parts with his pa. Good man, honest. Works that land harder than most and treats his hands fair. Never known him to raise his voice, even when he's got cause. Mrs. Sullivan gave Danielle a speculative look. He's not married, you know. Danielle felt her cheeks warm. I'm going as his housekeeper, Mrs. Sullivan. The older woman chuckled. Of course you are, dear, just making conversation. By Friday, Danielle had packed her trunk again and said her goodbyes to Mrs. Sullivan and the few acquaintances she'd made in Promise Creek. Owen arrived promptly at noon, driving a wagon loaded with supplies. All set. He asked as he loaded her trunk into the back. Yes, thank you, Danielle replied, accepting his hand to climb up onto the wagon seat. The journey to the Blackwood Ranch took nearly 2 hours, during which Owen pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area. As they crested a hill, he pulled the wagon to a stop. There it is, he said, pride evident in his voice. Blackwood Ranch. Spread out before them was a valley with a creek running through it. A substantial log house stood near a cluster of outbuildings with corrals and a barn nearby. Beyond, cattle grazed on rolling grasslands, and in a separate pasture, horses moved like flowing water across the green expanse. It's beautiful, Danielle breathed, genuinely impressed by the scope of the operation. It's home, Owen said simply and clicked to the horses to continue down the hill. As they approached the house, a gray-haired woman emerged onto the porch, shading her eyes against the sun. That's Mrs. Fletcher, Owen explained. Been with us since Pa and I first settled here. Mrs. Fletcher turned out to be a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with calloused hands and kind eyes. She welcomed Danielle warmly and immediately began showing her around the house, a spacious 4-bedroom structure with a large kitchen, dining room, parlor, and study. Mr. Blackwood's room is there. Mrs. Fletcher indicated a door off the main hallway. Mine's been this one here, which will be yours now. The other 2 are for guests, though we don't get many. The bedroom was larger than Danielle had expected, with a comfortable-looking bed, a dresser, washstand, and even a small writing desk by the window that overlooked the creek. It's lovely, Danielle said, genuinely pleased with the accommodations. Mr. Blackwood believes in treating people right, Mrs. Fletcher said approvingly. Now let me show you the kitchen. That's where you'll be spending most of your time. The kitchen was well equipped with a large wood stove, ample counter space, and a pantry stocked with staples. Mrs. Fletcher explained that Danielle would be cooking for Owen and the 4 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse near the barn. Breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, supper at sundown, the older woman instructed. Simple food, but plenty of it. These men work hard and eat accordingly. Over the next few days, Mrs. Fletcher taught Danielle the rhythms of ranch life, when to start the bread rising, how much coffee to make for 5 hungry men, which ranch hand preferred his eggs over hard, and which liked them runny. She showed her where the vegetable garden was, introduced her to the chicken coop, and explained the monthly supply runs to Promise Creek. Owen kept his distance during this training period, appearing only at mealtimes and treating Danielle with polite respect. The ranch hands Joe, a weathered man in his 50s, the brothers Sam and Daniel, both in their 20s, and Miguel, a skilled horseman from Mexico, were equally respectful if somewhat shy around a new female presence. When Mrs. Fletcher departed for Denver at the end of the week, Danielle found herself alone in the big house with the responsibility of keeping it and its inhabitants running smoothly. It was challenging work, but she found it far more satisfying than the hotel. Here, she had autonomy and purpose. The men appreciated her efforts, especially when she began introducing new recipes that expanded their usual fare. One evening, about 2 weeks after Mrs. Fletcher's departure, Danielle was setting fresh baked apple pie on the windowsill to cool when Owen appeared at the kitchen door. "Something smells mighty fine, Miss Parker," he said, his eyes lighting up at the sight of the pie. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. It should be cool enough by supper time." Owen leaned against the doorframe, seeming hesitant. "I wanted to check if you're settling in all right. I know ranch life is different from what you're used to." Danielle wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm settling in just fine, thank you. It's peaceful here." Owen nodded, looking pleased. "Good, that's good. I was wondering if you might like to see more of the ranch tomorrow. Sunday's usually a quieter day and I could show you around properly." The invitation surprised Danielle. "I would like that very much, Mr. Blackwood. Call me Owen, please. Mr. Blackwood makes me feel like my pa's standing behind me." Danielle smiled. "Owen, then, and you may call me Danielle." "Danielle," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it on his tongue. "I'll saddle up a gentle mare for you after breakfast tomorrow." True to his word, Owen had a placid chestnut mare ready the following morning. He helped Danielle mount, his strong hands encircling her waist briefly as he lifted her into the saddle, sending an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "This is Penny," Owen said, patting the mare's neck. "She's sweet-tempered and steady, perfect for a beginner." Danielle adjusted her skirts, grateful she'd thought to wear her sturdiest boots. "She's beautiful." "Just follow my lead," Owen instructed as he swung up onto Thunder's back. "We'll take it slow." They rode out from the ranch house, Owen pointing out features of the property as they went the north pasture where the new calves were, the hay fields that would be cut later in the summer, the line of trees that marked the boundary of his land. Danielle found herself relaxing into the rhythm of riding, enjoying the gentle sway of the horse beneath her and the open sky above. "How many acres do you have?" she asked as they paused atop a rise that offered a panoramic view of the ranch. 640, Owen replied. "A full section. Pa and I worked it together at first, but I've added to it over the years. Bought the Jenkins place when old man Jenkins decided to move back east. That added another quarter section." "It's impressive what you've built," Danielle said sincerely. Owen's expression softened as he gazed out over his land. "It's a good life, if a hard one. Sometimes I wonder if I've done right by Pa's legacy." "How do you mean?" Owen shifted in his saddle, turning to face her more fully. "He always said land was meant to be shared, that a man wasn't truly wealthy until he had someone to share his prosperity with. He hoped I'd find a wife, start a family." Danielle felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "There's still time for that, surely." "Yes, I suppose there is." Owen's blue eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary before he looked away. "There's a nice spot by the creek just ahead. Thought we might stop for a bite to eat." The nice spot turned out to be a small clearing beside the creek, shaded by cottonwood trees. Owen spread a blanket on the ground and unpacked a lunch that he must have arranged with Danielle before they left: fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie, along with a jug of cool water from the spring near the house. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the burbling of the creek and the occasional nickering of the horses grazing nearby. "May I ask you something personal, Danielle?" Owen said eventually, setting aside his plate. Danielle nodded, curious. "What did you hope for when you agreed to be a mail-order bride? What kind of life were you seeking?" The question caught her off guard, but she considered it seriously. "Security at first, a home, perhaps in time children." She looked down at her hands. "I had few illusions about romantic love. I thought respect and kindness would be enough for a contented life." "And now," Owen pressed gently, "what do you hope for now?" Danielle raised her eyes to his. "I'm not sure when Mr. Jameson rejected me. It felt like the end of something, the end of hope, perhaps. But now, Owen encouraged when she trailed off. Now I think perhaps it was the beginning of something else, something I hadn't considered. Owen's expression grew thoughtful. Independence. Yes, partly that, Danielle agreed. I've never been entirely my own person before. With my aunt, I was always the dependent niece. With Mr. Jameson, I would have been the wife who owed her position to his charity. Here I work for my keep. There's dignity in that. There is, Owen acknowledged. Though there's dignity in other arrangements too, when they're founded on mutual respect. Something in his tone made Danielle look at him sharply, but his expression gave nothing away as he began packing up their lunch things. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both of them lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the house, Danielle could see the ranch hands gathered near the bunkhouse, enjoying their day of rest with a game of horseshoes. Owen helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for joining me today, Danielle. Thank you for showing me your land," she replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "It's truly beautiful." "Yes," Owen said softly, but he wasn't looking at the land. "Truly beautiful." The weeks that followed settled into a pleasant routine. Danielle rose early to prepare breakfast for the men, spent her mornings baking bread and tending to household chores, prepared dinner at noon, and then had a few hours in the afternoon for herself before starting supper preparations. She used this time to explore the area around the ranch house, tend to the vegetable garden, or sit on the porch with mending or a book borrowed from Owen's modest library. Owen himself was busy with ranch work, often riding out early and returning late, but he made a point of stopping by the kitchen when he returned, ostensibly to check if she needed anything from town on his next trip. But Danielle suspected he simply enjoyed their conversations as much as she did. They talked about books. Owen had a surprising fondness for poetry and about their childhoods, their hopes and disappointments. Owen told her about his experiences during the war, serving as a young cavalry scout for the Union, and Danielle shared stories of growing up in Boston under her aunt's strict but loving care. One evening in late June, a violent thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. Danielle had just finished washing the supper dishes when the first crack of lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening boom of thunder. The ranch hands had already retired to the bunkhouse, and Danielle was alone in the main house, Owen having ridden out earlier to check on a pregnant mare in the north pasture. As the storm intensified, Danielle grew increasingly worried. Owen should have returned by now. She paced the parlor, jumping at each thunderclap, peering anxiously out the windows into the rain-lashed darkness. When she heard the sound of hooves in the yard, she rushed to the door. Owen stumbled in, soaked to the skin and shivering. "Storm caught me by surprise," he gasped as Danielle helped him remove his dripping coat. "You're freezing," she exclaimed, feeling the chill of his hands. "Come sit by the fire. I'll fetch you some dry clothes." She hurried to his bedroom and returned with a flannel shirt and trousers, then busied herself making hot coffee while he changed behind the privacy screen in the corner of the parlor. When he emerged, his hair was still damp, but curling slightly as it dried in the warmth of the fire. "Thank you," he said, accepting the steaming mug she offered. "I wasn't expecting the storm to hit so fast." "Is the mare all right?" Danielle asked, sitting across from him. Owen nodded. "She's fine. No sign of the foal yet, but I think it'll be soon." He took a sip of coffee, his eyes on her over the rim of the mug. "Were you worried?" "Of course," Danielle admitted. "It's a terrible storm." A particularly loud crash of thunder shook the house, making Danielle jump. Owen set down his coffee and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "Not fond of storms?" he asked gently. Danielle shook her head. "They always frightened me as a child. My room in my aunt's house had a large window, and during storms it seemed as if the lightning was reaching for me." Without thinking, Owen put his arm around her shoulders. "You're safe here. This house has weathered worse storms than this." Danielle knew she should move away, maintain the proper distance between employer and employee, but the warmth of his arm and the solid presence of him beside her was too comforting to resist. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the storm rage outside. "I'm glad you came to work here, Danielle," Owen said quietly after some time had passed. Danielle looked up at him, struck by the sincerity in his voice. "I am too. I've been alone too long," he continued, his gaze holding hers. "The house was always too quiet after Pa died, even with Mrs. Fletcher here, but now it feels like a home again." Danielle's heart began to beat faster. "Owen, I know it's not proper," he said quickly. "You're in my employ and I should keep my distance, but I can't help how I feel." "How do you feel?" Danielle whispered, hardly daring to hope. Owen's hand came up to touch her cheek gently. "Like I've been waiting for you without knowing it, like you belong here not as my housekeeper but as—" "As what?" Danielle prompted when he hesitated. "As my partner, my wife." Owen's eyes searched her face. "I know it's sudden and I'm not asking for an answer now, but I wanted you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond employer and employee." Danielle's mind whirled. She had come to Wyoming territory, seeking security in marriage to a stranger, only to find herself falling in love with a different man, entirely a man who saw her value, beyond what she could bring to a marriage financially. "I don't have a dowry," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I have nothing to offer but myself." Owen's expression softened into a smile. "Danielle, I've got enough for us both. All I want is you if you'll have me." The storm outside seemed to fade into insignificance as Danielle searched Owen's face, seeing nothing but sincerity and affection there. Slowly, she nodded. "I think I would like that very much, Owen Blackwood." Owen's smile broadened, lighting his entire face. "May I kiss you, Danielle Parker?" In answer, Danielle leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Owen's lips met hers gently at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Danielle felt as if she'd finally found her place in the world. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I'll court you properly," he promised. "I don't want anyone thinking I took advantage of your position here." Danielle smiled, touched by his concern for her reputation. "I would appreciate that." Owen kept his word. Over the next few weeks, he courted Danielle with all the formality he could muster on a working ranch. He brought her wildflowers picked from the hillsides, took her on Sunday rides to picturesque spots on the property, and even arranged for them to attend church services in Promise Creek, making their courtship public. The town buzzed with the news, and Mrs. Sullivan, when they stopped by the hotel for lunch after church one Sunday, could barely contain her satisfaction. "Didn't I tell you Owen Blackwood was a good man?" she said to Danielle with a knowing smile. "And here you are, arm in arm, looking like you belong together." "You were right, Mrs. Sullivan," Danielle acknowledged with a laugh, "though I was only looking for employment at the time." "Sometimes the good Lord has plans we don't expect," the older woman said sagely. "When are you two making it official?" Owen cleared his throat. "We're thinking harvest time if Reverend Phillips is available." "That gives us about 2 months to prepare," Danielle added. Mrs. Sullivan nodded approvingly. "Time enough to sew a proper wedding dress. You come see me next week, Danielle. I've got some lovely fabric that would suit you." As they rode back to the ranch that afternoon, Danielle couldn't help but marvel at the turn her life had taken. 3 months ago, she had been devastated by rejection, uncertain of her future. Now, she was engaged to a man she genuinely cared for, a man who valued her for herself rather than what she could bring to the marriage financially. "Penny for your thoughts," Owen said, noticing her contemplative expression. Danielle smiled. "I was just thinking about how differently things turned out from what I expected when I first came west." "Disappointed?" Owen asked, a touch of worry in his voice. "Quite the opposite," Danielle assured him, reaching across to touch his arm. "I came seeking security and found happiness instead." "It's more than I dared hope for." Owen's face relaxed into a smile. "I felt the same way when you agreed to marry me, like I'd been given a gift I hadn't even known to ask for." They rode in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the late summer sunshine and each other's company. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," Owen said eventually. "About our future." "Oh," Danielle looked at him curiously. "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch. There's a piece of land adjoining ours to the east, good water access, excellent grazing. I've had my eye on it for a while, but I wanted to know your thoughts before making any decisions." Danielle was touched by his inclusion of her in such considerations. "Do you think it's a good investment?" "I do. The cattle operation is doing well and the horse breeding even better. With more land, we could increase both." Owen glanced at her. "But it would mean tightening our belts for a year or two. Any extra money would go into the land and stock." "I understand," Danielle said thoughtfully, "and I trust your judgment, Owen. If you think it's the right move for our future, then I support it." Owen's smile was worth any potential hardship. "Our future," he repeated, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." The wedding preparations proceeded smoothly over the next weeks. Mrs. Sullivan did indeed have beautiful fabric, a creamy satin that Danielle, with help from several women in Promise Creek, transformed into a simple but elegant wedding dress. Owen, meanwhile, ordered a new suit from Denver and spent long hours with the ranch hands ensuring that the fall roundup would be completed before the wedding. As the date approached, guests began arriving from neighboring ranches and towns. Owen's closest friend from his Army days, David Marshall, came all the way from St. Louis to serve as best man. Even Mrs. Fletcher made the journey from Denver, declaring that wild horses couldn't keep her from seeing her boy get married. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, a perfect September morning. Danielle dressed in Mrs. Sullivan's room at the hotel, where she'd spent the night in keeping with tradition. Her hands trembled slightly as she secured the last button on her dress and arranged the veil. Mrs. Fletcher had loaned her something borrowed dear, and it brought me luck in my own marriage. A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Sullivan, resplendent in her Sunday best. "My goodness, don't you look beautiful?" the older woman exclaimed. "Owen Blackwood won't know what hit him." Danielle smiled nervously. "I hope everything goes smoothly. Weddings never go entirely to plan, my dear, but that's part of their charm." Mrs. Sullivan patted her hand. "The reverend is ready and the church is full to bursting. Shall we go?" The small white church at the edge of Promise Creek was indeed packed with well-wishers, ranchers and their families, townspeople, and even Mr. Jameson, looking somewhat abashed in the back pew. Danielle felt a moment of vindication at the sight of him, but it passed quickly, replaced by gratitude. If he hadn't rejected her, she would never have found her way to Owen and the happiness she now knew. The music began, Mrs. Potter at the organ playing a somewhat uneven rendition of the wedding march, and Danielle began her walk down the aisle. At the altar stood Owen, his tall frame accentuated by his new suit, his face alight with joy as he watched her approach. In that moment, Danielle knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Reverend Phillips performed the ceremony with dignity and warmth, and when Owen slipped a simple gold band onto Danielle's finger, it was my mother's. He told her when he first showed it to her, she felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared. "You may kiss your bride." Owen didn't need to be told twice. His kiss was tender but filled with promise, and the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed at the Blackwood Ranch lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by the women of Promise Creek. A fiddler and banjo player provided music for dancing, and the ranch hands had constructed a wooden platform that served as a dance floor. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the festivities, Owen found Danielle sitting with Mrs. Fletcher and Mrs. Sullivan. "May I steal my wife for a dance?" he asked, extending his hand to Danielle on the dance floor. Owen held her close, swaying gently to the music. "Happy Mrs. Blackwood," he murmured in her ear. The new name sent a thrill through Danielle. "Very happy, Mr. Blackwood." "I have a wedding gift for you," Owen said, guiding her toward the edge of the gathering. "It's not much, but I thought you might like it." He led her to the corral where a beautiful bay mare stood, adorned with a ribbon around her neck. "This is Starlight," Owen said. "She's gentle but spirited, like someone else I know." Danielle approached the horse, stroking her velvety nose. "She's magnificent, Owen, thank you." "I thought we could ride together in the mornings when work allows," Owen explained. "There's so much of the ranch I still want to show you." Danielle turned to him, her heart full. "I look forward to seeing all of it and to building our life here together." Owen drew her into his arms. "I love you, Danielle Blackwood." "And I love you, Owen Blackwood," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. The following spring brought new life to the Blackwood Ranch. The mares foaled, the cows calved, and the vegetable garden Danielle had expanded flourished under her care. Owen had successfully purchased the eastern parcel of land, increasing the ranch's size and potential for growth. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Danielle took Owen's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I have news," she said softly. Owen's eyes widened in understanding, then filled with wonder. "A baby. We're having a baby," Danielle nodded, her own eyes shining with happy tears. "Dr. Thompson confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. He says the baby should arrive in early November." Owen gathered her into his arms, his joy palpable. "Danielle, this is wonderful, a family of our own." As the months passed, Danielle's body changed, her belly growing round with their child. Owen became increasingly protective, insisting on hiring a young woman from town to help with the household chores, despite Danielle's protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing her duties. "You're carrying precious cargo," he insisted, "and I won't have you overworking yourself." The baby, a healthy boy they named James Owen, after both their fathers arrived on a cold November night with Mrs. Sullivan serving as midwife. When Owen first held his son, his hands trembling slightly with emotion, Danielle thought she had never seen anything more beautiful. "He has your eyes," Owen whispered, gazing down at the infant's blue eyes so like his own. "And your chin," Danielle observed, touching the baby's small but decidedly square jawline. As winter settled over the ranch, the new family established their own rhythms and routines. Danielle found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she had anticipated, and Owen proved to be an attentive father, often carrying James in a sling across his chest as he went about his less strenuous ranch duties. By the time spring returned, bringing with it James's first smiles and coos. Danielle could hardly remember the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her when she first arrived in Wyoming territory. This land, once so foreign and intimidating, had become home. This man, once a stranger, had become the center of her world. And this child, a living embodiment of their love, had completed their family in a way she had only dreamed of. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, James sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside them, Owen took Danielle's hand in his. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" he asked. "If Jameson hadn't sent you away, or if the stagecoach wheel hadn't broken that day," Danielle considered the question. "Sometimes. But then I think that perhaps it was all meant to be. Every step, even the painful ones, led me here to you and James." Owen squeezed her hand. "I'm grateful every day that you found your way to my ranch, Danielle Blackwood. You've made this house a home and my life complete." "As you have mine," Danielle replied, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and pink. "I came west seeking security and found a love greater than I ever imagined possible." Owen pressed a kiss to her temple. "And we're just getting started, my love. We have a lifetime ahead of us." As if in agreement, James stirred in his cradle, his tiny fist waving in the air. Danielle and Owen exchanged smiles, their hearts full with the knowledge that their greatest adventure, building a life and family together on this wild, beautiful land, was well underway. Years later, when James was joined by two sisters, Elizabeth and Sarah, and the Blackwood Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the territory, Danielle would sometimes take out the letter that had first brought her Westminster. Jameson's advertisement for a bride with a dowry, and marvel at how what had seemed like misfortune had actually been the beginning of her greatest happiness. And on their 10th wedding anniversary, when Owen presented her with a deed to a parcel of land adjoining the ranch in your name, Danielle, because you've more than earned your place here, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just security but true partnership, not just respect but deep and abiding love. In the end, what had mattered wasn't the dowry she lacked, but the courage she possessed, the courage to journey into the unknown, to rebuild after disappointment, and to open her heart to the possibility of love with a man who saw her true worth from the very beginning.